Sometimes, an ordinary evening can change your life forever. Alex Turner, a quiet, hard-working National Guard veteran, had a simple plan: finish his shift, hit the gym, and clear his mind. But what should have been a routine workout became the start of something much bigger. When three officers entered the gym with suspicion in their eyes, Alex found himself thrust into a situation he never saw coming: handcuffed, humiliated, and dragged away in front of stunned onlookers. What followed wasn't just a legal battle, but a test of strength, dignity, and resilience. In a city divided by assumptions and fear, Alex's arrest sends shockwaves through the community. With his freedom and reputation on the line, Alex must find his voice and fight not just for himself, but for every person who's ever felt unseen or unheard. But how far can one person's courage reach? The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, as Alex Turner stepped off the crowded city bus. The late autumn breeze tugged at his jacket, but Alex barely noticed. The rhythmic hum of the bus fading behind him was just background noise as he walked toward the gym. It was a modest building with a faded sign that read Ironworks Fitness, but to Alex, it was more than just a gym. It was a sanctuary, a place where the weight of his daily life lifted with every rep and stretch. Alex was 29, an IT specialist who spent most of his day staring at screens and solving other people's problems. He was good at his job, but the monotony of it sometimes made him feel invisible. No one at work knew that he had served in the National Guard for 7 years. They just saw a quiet man who clocked in, did his work, and left without much fuss. But beneath that calm exterior, Alex had seen things most people never would: torn cities overseas, long nights under open skies, and moments when survival came down to grit and instinct. The city where Alex lived wasn't known for its charm. The streets were cracked, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and hot pretzels from food carts that lined the block. People here kept to themselves, heads down, eyes forward. There was a kind of unspoken agreement. No one bothered you as long as you did the same. As Alex reached the gym doors, he nodded at Ricky, the front desk attendant, who always gave him a grin and a quick thumbs up. Ricky was one of the few people who seemed genuinely cheerful. Inside, familiar sounds greeted Alex's: music playing from overhead speakers, the hum of treadmills, the clank of barbells hitting the floor. He slipped his headphones over his ears and found his usual spot in the corner near the stretching mats. As he settled into his routine stretching, rolling out his shoulders, he noticed the door open again. 3 men entered, their uniforms unmistakable: police officers. Alex watched them out of the corner of his eye. Something about their movements was different. They weren't here to work out. They were here on a mission. Alex's pulse quickened as the officers scanned the gym, their eyes locking onto him. The tallest of the 3, a broad-shouldered man with a hard expression, strode straight toward Alex. "Hey," the officer said, his voice sharp. Alex took out one earbud, confused. "Yeah?" The officer stopped in front of him, arms crossed. "What are you doing here?" Alex frowned. Stretching. Getting ready for my workout." The officer narrowed his eyes. "This gym's supposed to be closed after hours. You know the rules." Alex straightened, his confusion deepening. "Sir, I've been a member here for years. The gym closes at 10. It's barely 7:30. The officer took a step closer, crowding into Alex's space. "That's not what I'm talking about. You're a disturbance." Alex's stomach sank. He'd heard that tone before: an accusation wrapped in vague words. He'd grown up in this city. He knew how quickly situations like this could turn. "Look," Alex said carefully, keeping his voice level. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble. I'm just here to work out." The officer didn't back down. Instead, he reached out and grabbed Alex's arm. "Stand up," he ordered. The gym seemed to freeze. The hum of treadmills, the clank of weights, everything faded as heads turned. No one stepped forward, though. They watched, eyes wide, but bodies still. Alex felt a flare of indignation burn in his chest. He yanked his arm back. "Let me go," he said firmly. "Quiet!" another officer barked. Before Alex could protest again, the first officer twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his feet. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists. "You're coming with us," the officer muttered as they began dragging him toward the door. Alex kept his head high, even as the humiliation gnawed at him. He refused to let them see him break. As they led him outside, the cool night air hit his face. A few passers-by paused, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern, but no one intervened. The officers shoved Alex into the back of the squad car, the door slamming shut behind him. The world outside the tinted windows felt distant now, a blur of lights and shapes. Alex clenched his jaw, trying to steady his breath. This wasn't just about him. He could feel it in his bones. This was about assumptions, about the way people like him, quiet men, who didn't fit someone's idea of normal, were seen as threats. The squad car pulled away from the gym, the weight of the moment pressing down on Alex's chest. But as he sat in the dim, cramped space, a quiet voice from deep inside rose up, steady and clear. "This isn't the end." The squad car rattled over potholes as Alex stared out the window, his reflection faintly staring back at him. The city lights blurred past, cold and distant. His wrists throbbed where the cuffs dug in, but he refused to shift or show discomfort. The officers in the front barely spoke, the only sounds coming from the low crackle of their radio and the hum of the tires on the road. Alex tried to piece together the moment how a normal evening at the gym had turned into this. His mind raced with unspoken questions. Why me? What had I done? But deep down, he knew the answer was simpler than the questions made it seem. Minutes later, the car pulled up to the station. One of the officers opened the door and jerked his head toward the entrance. "Let's go." Alex stepped out carefully, trying not to stumble as they led him inside. The harsh fluorescent lights in the station made everything feel sterile and unkind. "Name," the officer behind the desk said flatly. "Alex Turner," he replied, his voice calm. The officer typed it into the computer without looking up. "Sit over there." Alex sat down on a metal bench, cold and unwelcoming. His reflection caught in the fingerprint-stained glass, separating the holding area from the rest of the station. He looked tired, defeated. He hated that. "Do not let them take more from you than they already have," a voice inside reminded him. The processing was quick, but impersonal. They took his fingerprints, a mugshot, and asked him more questions in a disinterested monotone. Then they led him to a small holding cell at the back of the station. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound reverberating in the pit of his stomach. The cell was barely wide enough for him to stretch his legs. A metal bench ran along one side, and the air was cold and stale. Alex sat down and leaned his head back against the wall, closing his eyes. At first, he tried to think about anything else, his work project, the weekend plans he'd made with friends, but the memories came unbidden. He was 12 again, standing on the corner of Maple and 5th, waiting for the bus after school. A police cruiser had slowed down as it passed. The officer driving had narrowed his eyes at Alex, like he'd already decided he was guilty of something. Alex had felt the weight of that stare long after the cruiser disappeared down the street. Then there was Mr. Daniels, his next-door neighbor, who'd once been tackled outside a grocery store because someone thought he looked like a suspect. Daniels had taught Alex how to ride a bike when he was a kid, steadying him with one hand until Alex could balance on his own. He'd been harmless. Alex had learned early that staying invisible was sometimes the best defense. Speak calmly, avoid eye contact, never give them a reason. But tonight, all those unwritten rules hadn't mattered. The clanging of keys snapped Alex back to the present. An officer walked past his cell without stopping, but the sound lingered in the empty room. He took a slow, measured breath and exhaled. His grandfather's voice came to him then strong and sure, like the old man was sitting right next to him. No one can strip your worth unless you let them. His grandfather had always been a man of quiet strength, a war veteran who didn't believe in raising his voice to make a point. He'd taught Alex about resilience, not the loud, brash kind, but the type you carried inside like a quiet flame. Alex straightened his posture. He couldn't change what had happened tonight. He couldn't undo the humiliation of being led out of the gym in handcuffs or erase the way people had looked at him like they weren't sure if they should intervene. But he could control what came next. He wouldn't let this break him. The minutes dragged into hours. The station grew quieter as the night deepened. Alex tried to shut his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. The cold bench pressed into his back, and his thoughts kept looping back to the same unanswered question: what now? Time was a strange thing in that room, stretching endlessly until the sound of approaching footsteps made Alex sit up straighter. The door opened, and a new officer stepped in tall, with a tired but less hostile expression. He had short, salt-and-pepper hair and a badge that read, Sullivan. Alex Turner? Alex nodded. Sullivan unlocked the cell door and gestured for Alex to follow him. Your lawyer's here. Let's go. Relief and apprehension warred in Alex's chest as he walked out of the cell. He followed Sullivan to a small interview room where a familiar face waited: Maya Evans, his friend from college, and now a defense attorney. Maya stood as soon as she saw him, her expression a mix of worry and determination. Alex, she said, stepping forward. Alex felt a knot in his throat but managed a small smile. Maya. She placed a hand on his arm, a brief but reassuring gesture. We'll sort this out. Alex sat across from her, his shoulders relaxing just a little. For the first time since the arrest, he felt like someone was truly on his side. Maya took out her notebook and began jotting down notes as Alex recounted everything: the gym, the officers, the accusations. When he finished, Maya's eyes flashed with anger, but her voice remained calm. This is wrong on every level, but we've got a case. You did nothing wrong. Alex nodded, the knot of tension in his chest loosening. Her confidence gave him strength. As Maya gathered her things, she said, There's a hearing first thing in the morning. Stay strong. This isn't over. Alex met her gaze. I'm ready. The officer led Alex back to the cell, but this time the walls didn't feel as suffocating. He sat on the bench and took another slow breath. The night wasn't over yet, but something had changed. The weight of uncertainty was still there, but alongside it was something else: hope. Morning came too soon, and with it, the hollow clang of the cell door. Alex hadn't slept, not really. He drifted into a restless half-sleep, jolted awake every time a door slammed or someone walked by. His mind had been too full of questions, but now there was no time for doubt. The officer from last night, Sullivan, returned with a clipboard in hand. Time to go, he said. Alex stood, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness from the metal bench. His heart pounded in his chest, but his face stayed calm. He knew how to mask nerves with discipline, how to keep his fear locked away beneath a composed exterior. He was led through the back hallway of the station, down a narrow corridor that smelled like disinfectant and stale air. The world outside the station was waking up: early risers grabbing coffee, school buses rumbling through the streets, but Alex's world had narrowed to this moment. They brought him through a side entrance into the courthouse, where Maya was already waiting in the lobby. She was dressed in a charcoal suit, her hair pulled into a sleek bun. The calm authority she carried gave Alex another steadying breath. You good? She asked, her eyes searching his face for any cracks. Alex nodded. Yeah, let's do this. Maya gave a reassuring nod and led him toward the courtroom. The doors loomed tall, and as they pushed inside, the air changed cooler, stiller, like stepping into a different world. The room smelled faintly of old wood and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting sharp lines across the polished floor. Alex took a seat beside Maya at the defense table, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Across from him, the prosecutor stood shuffling his papers. He was younger than Alex expected, with a sharp jawline and a suit that probably cost more than Alex's monthly rent. The judge entered, and everyone stood until she took her seat. She was an older woman with a sharp but fair gaze. She adjusted her glasses as she looked over the case file. The prosecutor cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Your Honor, the defendant, Mr. Turner, was detained due to his disruptive behavior at a public gym. He resisted officers who were performing their duties and attempted to escalate the situation." Alex's jaw clenched, but he kept quiet. He could feel the weight of the room pressing in on him. Eyes watched him from every angle, judging, questioning. The prosecutor went on, painting a picture of Alex that didn't resemble reality, a man who refused to cooperate, who posed a threat to public safety. Each word chipped away at the truth until the version of events became something unrecognizable. Maya leaned toward Alex, whispering, "Stay calm. It's almost our turn." When the prosecutor finally sat down, Maya rose smoothly, her expression composed but fierce. "Your Honor," she began, "my client, Alex Turner, is not a stranger to discipline or public service. He has served this country honorably as a National Guard sergeant for 7 years. He is a respected professional and has no prior record of misconduct." She turned, gesturing toward Alex. The events in question did not unfold the way the prosecution claims. Mr. Turner was a paying gym member who was simply working out when he was confronted without cause. He remained calm until he was physically provoked. There is no evidence that he was a threat or caused a disturbance. The judge nodded slightly, her expression neutral but attentive. Maya took a slow step forward. "Your Honor, this case is not just about one evening. It is about what assumptions were made and why. Alex Turner was targeted not because of his actions, but because of what he looked like. And that is a failure of the very system meant to protect us." Alex felt the eyes in the room shift as Maya's words settled like a quiet storm. The judge's gaze rested on him now, studying him closely. "Mr. Turner," she said finally, "please rise." Alex stood, his back straight, his heart steady now despite the nerves underneath. "You may speak," the judge said. Alex's breath felt heavier for a moment, but he let it out slowly. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but firm. "Your Honor, I have spent years serving this country. I have worn a uniform to protect the freedoms we all hold dear. I have never asked for special treatment, only fairness and respect. That night, I was treated like a criminal for simply existing in a space I had every right to be in." He paused, glancing at the officers seated at the back of the room. Their expressions were blank, but Alex didn't need their remorse. He wasn't speaking for them. He was speaking for himself. "I am not asking for sympathy," Alex continued, his voice steady. "I am asking for justice, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong." The courtroom was silent. Even the air felt still. Alex met the judge's gaze and held it. He had nothing to hide. The judge leaned back slightly, folding her hands. "We will take a recess," she said, her tone thoughtful. The gavel struck, and people began to stir as they stood. But Alex stayed rooted to the spot for a moment, letting the weight of what he had just said settle. Maya touched his arm. "You did great," she murmured. Alex nodded, though the moment felt surreal. They walked out of the courtroom and into the quiet hallway. The prosecutor walked past them without making eye contact, his jaw tight. Alex could feel the tension radiating off him, like he hadn't expected Alex to speak with such calm, such resolve. "Do you think the judge believed me?" Alex asked, as they reached a quiet corner of the lobby. Maya looked at him with a small, confident smile. "I think she sees the truth now, and that is what matters." Alex let out a long breath as they sat on one of the benches. The morning sun filtering through the windows felt warm against his skin. No matter how things turned out, he knew one thing for sure. He had stood his ground. The hallway was quiet, except for the soft hum of conversation in the distance. Alex sat beside Maya on the wooden bench, his hands resting on his knees as he stared straight ahead. The morning sunlight cast long golden beams across the marble floor. But despite the stillness of the world outside, Alex felt the churn of tension deep in his chest. "I have never felt that exposed," Alex admitted quietly. Maya leaned in, her voice low but steady. "You handled it exactly how you needed to. The truth doesn't need to be shouted to be heard." Alex nodded but didn't speak. His mind was replaying every word he had said, searching for cracks that might weaken his case. But before the doubt could settle, the door to the courtroom opened, and an officer motioned for them to return. Alex and Maya stood and walked back inside. The room felt heavier now, the anticipation thick. The judge was already seated, her expression calm but unreadable. The prosecutor was back at his table, rifling through his papers as though trying to regain control of the narrative. As Alex took his seat, he caught sight of a familiar face near the back of the room. It was Ricky from the gym, dressed in a plain gray sweater and jeans. Alex's heart swelled at the unexpected sight of someone who had shown up for him. Ricky gave him a small nod, a gesture of quiet solidarity. The judge's gavel brought the room to silence. She adjusted her glasses and looked down at her notes for a moment before speaking. "This court has reviewed the arguments presented this morning," the judge began, her voice calm but firm. "It is clear that there are conflicting versions of the events that took place. However, certain facts remain indisputable." Alex held his breath. The judge continued, her gaze steady. "Mr. Turner is a veteran who has served this country with honor. He has no history of violence or misconduct. By all accounts, he is a respected member of his community. On the night in question, he was not found engaging in any illegal behavior prior to the arrest." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. The judge's voice softened slightly as she addressed Alex directly. "Mr. Turner, your composure and honesty today have been noted. This court finds that the charges brought against you lack sufficient evidence and are therefore dismissed." A soft gasp rippled through the room. For a moment, Alex didn't move. He barely registered Maya's hand squeezing his arm or the sound of murmured voices behind him. The word "dismissed" echoed in his mind like a lifeline finally thrown into stormy waters. The judge wasn't finished. Additionally, this court strongly recommends a formal review of the officer's conduct during this arrest. Ensuring the fair treatment of all citizens is a cornerstone of justice. The prosecutor's face was tight with frustration, his argument unraveling before his eyes. Alex watched him for a moment before looking away. This wasn't about winning against one man, it was about something much larger. The gavel struck once more, signaling the end of the hearing. The courtroom began to stir as people gathered their things and prepared to leave. Maya turned to Alex, her face lit with relief. "It's over," she said, her smile wide. "You're free." Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He stood slowly, the weight of everything lifting just a little. But as he glanced back at the officers sitting in the back row, he felt a lingering tug of something unresolved. One of them, the tall officer who had grabbed him at the gym, caught Alex's eye. For a brief moment, there was something in his expression that Alex hadn't expected. Remorse. The officer lowered his gaze before standing and walking out without a word. Alex felt a strange sense of pity for the man, but he wasn't ready to dwell on it. He turned and walked toward the exit, his steps steady and deliberate. In the hallway, a small group of people had gathered, familiar faces from the gym, a few co-workers who had heard what happened, even a reporter holding a notepad. Ricky stepped forward, a wide grin on his face. "Man, I had to be here," he said, clapping Alex on the shoulder. They can't treat you like that and get away with it. Alex smiled, the warmth of Ricky's support filling a space in him that had felt hollow for hours. Thanks for showing up, Alex said. It means more than you know. The reporter, a young woman with dark curls and a determined expression, approached carefully. Mr. Turner, she began, her pen poised, would you be willing to share your thoughts on how today went? Maya placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. You don't have to answer if you're not ready, she said gently. But Alex straightened, meeting the reporter's gaze with calm resolve. I'll answer, he said. The hallway quieted as people leaned in to listen. Today wasn't just about proving my innocence, Alex said. It was about showing that we all deserve dignity, no matter who we are or where we come from. I'm not the first person this has happened to, and I know I won't be the last. But we can't stay silent. Change starts with holding people accountable and standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The reporter scribbled furiously, nodding. The people around Alex murmured their support, some clapping softly. As the crowd began to thin out, Maya nudged Alex's arm. You should get some rest. It's been a long couple of days. Alex nodded, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. But before he could take another step, Ricky caught his arm. Hey, Ricky said, his voice quieter now. You've always been a good guy, Alex. Not just because you're strong, but because you treat people right. Don't let this mess change you. Alex's throat tightened as he nodded. I won't, he promised. Ricky smiled and stepped back, letting Alex head for the exit. As Alex stepped outside, the cold air hit his face, waking him up a little. The sky was bright, the crisp morning light making everything feel new. He paused at the top of the courthouse steps, looking out at the city. The world felt different, lighter somehow. The fight wasn't over. He knew that. There would still be challenges ahead, but he had made it through this storm. And that, he realized, was the first step towards something better. With his shoulders squared and his heart steady, Alex took the next step forward. The courthouse steps felt endless as Alex descended them. The cold wind nipped at his face, but he barely noticed it. The case was over, the charges dismissed, but the world outside hadn't magically changed. In fact, it was louder now. Maya walked beside him, her phone buzzing constantly as news outlets began picking up the story. A few reporters tried to catch Alex's attention as they reached the sidewalk, their voices blending into the background noise of the city. Mr. Turner, do you believe this was a case of discrimination? Alex, what message do you want to send to the community? Do you think the department should issue a public apology? Maya stepped in, her voice firm but professional. No comments for now, thank you. She gently pulled Alex away from the crowd and steered him toward the street corner. Let's get you out of here, she said. Alex nodded, grateful for the escape. They caught a cab, and as soon as the door shut behind them, the noise of the city became a distant hum. By the time Alex reached his apartment, exhaustion settled over him like a weighted blanket. His small one-bedroom apartment was tidy, but sparse, an old but sturdy couch, a few framed photos on the wall, and a coffee table stacked with books. He dropped his bag near the door and sank onto the couch, letting out a long breath. The silence was almost too much after the chaos of the day. Alex leaned forward and grabbed his phone. His notifications had exploded: texts, missed calls, social media tags. Curious, he opened one of the news apps. The headline hit him like a wave. Veteran cleared of charges after controversial arrest at local gym. Below it was a photo of him standing in court, calm but resolute as he spoke to the judge. Alex scrolled through the article, skimming the quotes from reporters and public reactions. The responses were mixed. Some comments praised him. Finally, someone standing up for what's right. Alex Turner is a hero, but others were less kind. Typical, playing the victim card. Just comply, and these things wouldn't happen. Alex's stomach twisted at the harsh words. He'd known there would be backlash, but seeing it laid out like that still stung. A message popped up from his mom. "Proud of you, son. Don't let the noise get to you. Love, Mom." Alex smiled despite himself. His mom had always known exactly what to say. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of the dismissal spread quickly, becoming a local flashpoint. Talk radio shows debated the case, and social media buzzed with hashtags and heated threads. At work, things felt different. His co-workers greeted him with polite smiles, but there was an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. He caught snippets of hushed conversations as he walked past half-finished sentences that stopped when he entered the room. During lunch, his colleague Mark slid into the chair across from him. "Man," Mark said, shaking his head. "This whole thing has been crazy. I saw your name on the news and thought, no way." Alex nodded, biting into his sandwich. "Yeah, it's been a lot." Mark hesitated before adding, "I just want you to know I've got your back." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "A lot of us do. But some people, they don't know how to handle stuff like this. They're afraid to say the wrong thing, so they just say nothing." Alex swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "Thanks, Mark. That means a lot." Mark patted the table and stood. "If you need anything, just let me know." As Mark walked away, Alex stared down at his half-finished lunch. Mark's kindness was unexpected, but reassuring. Still, it made him reflect on how quiet some others had been, people he'd considered friends, who hadn't reached out at all. That evening, Alex went to the community center for the first time since the arrest. The center was hosting an open discussion about policing and justice, sparked by Alex's case. He didn't plan to speak, he just wanted to listen. The room was packed with people, neighbors, gym regulars, local activists, and even a few city officials. The energy in the room was palpable, a mix of anger, hope, and frustration. A man at the front, a middle-aged veteran in a faded jacket, stood and spoke passionately. "What happened to Alex isn't new. This has been happening for years. But now it's public, and we've got a chance to demand change." The room murmured in agreement. A young woman stood next. "We need better training, more accountability, and transparency," she said. "It shouldn't take someone like Alex, a National Guard sergeant, to prove their humanity." Alex felt the weight of her words settle over him. Someone called out from the back, "Is Alex Turner here tonight?" Heads turned, scanning the room. Alex hesitated for a moment, then slowly stood. A hush fell over the crowd as people recognized him. Alex cleared his throat. "Yeah, I'm here." His voice was calm, but carried through the room. The moderator gestured for him to come forward. Alex stepped to the front, feeling every pair of eyes on him. He took a breath and began. "I didn't plan to speak tonight, but I want to say thank you to everyone who's shown support. I didn't expect this kind of response, but I want to be clear. This isn't just about me. What happened to me is part of something bigger, and we can't just talk about change, we have to work for it." The crowd nodded, some clapping softly. Alex continued, "There's no overnight fix, but what we can do is stay engaged, keep pushing for accountability, and make sure that nobody feels invisible in their own community." The room erupted in applause. For the first time in days, Alex felt something stir in his chest, a sense of purpose that went beyond what had happened to him. As the event wrapped up, people came up to shake his hand, offer their thanks, and share their own stories. When Alex finally stepped outside, the sky was a deep navy, the stars faint but present. He took a deep breath of the cool night air. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he knew he wasn't walking it alone. The morning after the community meeting, Alex sat at his kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee as sunlight poured through the window. The apartment felt quieter than usual. His phone buzzed again, another message from someone thanking him for his courage and sharing their own story. The meeting had left a deep impression on him. He could still hear the applause, see the faces of people who felt seen for the first time. The weight of their hopes and expectations sat heavy on his shoulders. Alex scrolled through his messages, stopping at one from Maya. "Great job last night. You've got people listening, don't stop now." He stared at the screen for a long moment, then sent back a simple reply. "I won't." By afternoon, Alex was back at the community center. It felt different this time, not as a spectator, but as someone stepping into a new role. He was there for a meeting with a local group focused on police accountability and community outreach. The leader of the group, an older man named Mr. Lewis, greeted Alex with a warm handshake. Mr. Lewis was a retired teacher, known for his quiet wisdom and long-standing commitment to justice. "I've been hearing your name a lot lately," Mr. Lewis said, his eyes twinkling with something close to pride. "You're making waves." Alex chuckled softly. "Not sure if that's a good thing yet." Mr. Lewis gave a knowing nod. "It is, but change always comes with a cost." The room slowly filled with familiar faces, people from the neighborhood, veterans who had served like Alex, and even a few city council members. There was a shared energy in the room, a feeling that they were standing on the edge of something important. As the meeting began, Mr. Lewis gestured for Alex to speak. Alex stood, rubbing his palms together as he gathered his thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot about what happens next," he started. "People keep asking me how we make this better, and honestly, I don't have all the answers. But I know this: we need trust, accountability, and respect, and that starts with real conversations, not blame." The room was quiet, listening. Alex continued, "We need to sit across from each other, police, community members, and figure out how to move forward. Not through fear, but through understanding." Someone in the back clapped, and soon others joined in. When the applause faded, Mr. Lewis stepped forward. "That's the kind of thinking we need," Mr. Lewis said. "But it's going to take work. Are you ready for that?" Alex nodded, determination in his eyes. "I'm ready." In the weeks that followed, Alex threw himself into the work. He met with veterans groups to build coalitions, attended city council meetings to speak about the need for change, and reached out to local officers willing to listen. There were moments of progress, officers who showed up to community discussions and listened, residents who shared stories that broke down walls, but there were setbacks too. One evening, Alex received a message that stopped him cold. "Keep your mouth shut, or you'll regret it." His stomach twisted as he stared at the screen. The words were simple but sharp, meant to instill fear. He forwarded the message to Maya, who called him immediately. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tense. "Yeah," Alex replied, though the tightness in his chest said otherwise. "I figured something like this would happen eventually." Maya's voice softened. "You do not deserve this. But listen, you're not alone. If you want to report it, I'll be right there with you." Alex took a breath, letting her words settle. "Thanks, Maya. I'll think about it." After they hung up, Alex sat in the dim quiet of his apartment. His mind wandered to his grandfather's old advice about fear. Courage isn't about not feeling afraid. It's about standing up anyway. Alex turned off his phone and went to bed, determined not to let fear dictate his next move. A week later, Alex was invited to speak at a public forum organized by a local nonprofit. The event was held in a high school auditorium, with rows of seats filled by community members, activists, and even a few off-duty officers. When Alex took the stage, he felt a familiar calm settle over him, the kind he'd felt during his National Guard deployments, when everything around him felt unpredictable. But he knew his purpose. He looked out at the crowd and began. "When I was arrested that night, I felt powerless. I thought, this is it. I'll just be another statistic. But what happened after that changed everything because of people like you. People who didn't stay silent." He paused, meeting the eyes of the audience. "I'm standing here today because I believe we can do better. But it's not enough to point fingers. Real change means doing the hard work of listening to each other and holding everyone, ourselves included, accountable. There was a moment of silence before the room erupted in applause. After the event, people came up to thank Alex, shake his hand, and share their stories. An older woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for speaking up," she said, her voice trembling. "My grandson was in a situation like yours. He didn't have anyone to stand up for him. But now, maybe things will be different." Alex's chest tightened with emotion. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We'll make sure his story is heard too." As the crowd began to thin, Alex stepped outside into the cool night air. The sky above was clear, the stars faint but visible. He took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. The road wasn't easy. There were still anonymous threats, heated arguments at meetings, and moments when Alex questioned if any of it was making a difference. But the faces he saw, the young girl who wanted to be a lawyer after hearing his story, the veteran who reached out to help bridge gaps between the community and law enforcement, they reminded him why he'd started. Alex walked home that night with a renewed sense of purpose. Change was slow and messy, but he knew this for certain. Every step he took made it harder for the darkness of injustice to stand unchallenged. For the first time in a long while, he didn't just feel like someone trying to survive the storm. He felt like someone who had learned how to guide others through it too. The days that followed the public forum were a whirlwind. Alex's story was being shared far beyond the city now, picked up by national outlets and discussed in online spaces he'd never imagined. His inbox was full of messages, some supportive, others scathing. Despite the noise, Alex stayed focused. He kept attending meetings, speaking at events, and working with Mr. Lewis and other community leaders to bridge the divide between law enforcement and the people they served. But not everyone saw Alex as a symbol of hope. It started subtly: long pauses in conversations when he entered a room, people avoiding eye contact at the grocery store. Then came the louder criticisms. One morning, as Alex sipped his coffee and browsed the latest headlines, he came across a news segment. The anchor's polished tone filled the room. Some argue that Alex Turner's approach, while admirable, is naive. Critics say his push for dialogue overshadows the real need for immediate reform. The screen cut to a man in a suit, Frank Mitchell, a local activist known for his blunt style. "Look," Frank said, leaning forward, "Alex Turner is brave. I respect that. But sitting in rooms with police officers who've spent years abusing their power, what does that accomplish? We've tried being nice. It's time for action." Alex set his mug down, staring at the screen. He'd expected criticism, but hearing it still hit hard. Frank wasn't just anyone, he was respected in the community. Maya called just as the segment ended. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. Alex sighed. "Yeah. You okay?" "I don't know," Alex admitted. "Frank's got a point. What if what I'm doing isn't enough?" Maya's voice softened. "You're not going to fix this overnight, Alex. No one can. But what you're doing matters. You've seen it yourself." Alex leaned back in his chair, thinking about the older woman at the forum who'd thanked him for giving her hope, about Ricky showing up at the courthouse. "Yeah," he said finally. "You're right." That afternoon, Alex met Mr. Lewis at the community center for another planning session. As they set up chairs in the meeting room, Mr. Lewis noticed Alex's quiet mood. "You've got that look," Mr. Lewis said, "like someone's walking around with a cloud over their head." Alex let out a half laugh. "It's been a rough morning." Mr. Lewis nodded knowingly. "Criticism's part of the package, son. You can't please everyone." "I know," Alex said, "but it feels like people want me to choose a side. Either I'm too soft, or I'm making things worse." Mr. Lewis set down a chair and crossed his arms. "Let me tell you something my grandmother used to say. You don't plant a tree today and expect shade tomorrow. The work you're doing, it's planting seeds. Some folks won't see the value, because they're standing in the sunburned part of the field. But one day, someone's going to sit under that tree and be grateful you didn't quit. Alex absorbed the words, letting them settle in his mind. Later that evening, Alex returned home and checked his phone. A text from Ricky lit up the screen. "You free tonight? Some of us are meeting at Joe's Diner. Come hang out." Alex hesitated. He hadn't spent much time with friends lately. His schedule had been consumed by meetings, interviews, and speaking events. "Be there in 30, he replied. Joe's Diner was a neighborhood staple, checkered floors, red leather booths, and the best pancakes in town. When Alex walked in, the familiar smell of coffee and maple syrup hit him. Ricky waved him over to a booth where a few gym regulars were seated. "Look who decided to show up," Ricky joked as Alex slid into the booth. Laughter filled the air as they caught up. For a while, it felt like the weight of everything had been left outside. Halfway through their meal, an older man approached their table. He wore a security guard uniform and looked hesitant but determined. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Alex. "I just wanted to say, I saw you on the news. What you're doing, it's brave. People like me, we notice. And I'm grateful." Alex blinked, caught off guard. "Thank you," he said sincerely. The man nodded and walked away, leaving Alex's friends staring in silence. "Man," Ricky said after a beat, "that was something." Alex smiled faintly. "Yeah, it was." For the rest of the night, that small moment stayed with him. The world could be harsh, but it could also surprise you with kindness when you least expected it. The next morning, Alex woke up feeling more centered. He knew the road would be long and difficult, but the path was clearer now. As he stepped outside, the city seemed a little less overwhelming. Conversations were happening, hard ones, uncomfortable ones, but they were happening. That meant something. And Alex knew that even the smallest ripple could grow into a wave if you kept pushing. The day of the formal hearing arrived faster than Alex expected. The courthouse was busier this time. News vans parked outside, reporters adjusting their microphones, and groups of onlookers gathering on the steps. The atmosphere buzzed with tension. Alex took a slow breath as he climbed the steps, Maya by his side. Her briefcase swung slightly as she walked, her calm presence steadying him. "You ready?" she asked as they reached the entrance. Alex adjusted the collar of his shirt and nodded. "Yeah, ready as I'll ever be." Maya smiled. "Good. Just remember, you've already proven your strength. Today is about making sure the truth is heard loud and clear." Alex nodded again, letting her words settle. They passed through security and entered the courtroom, where the familiar scent of polished wood and stale air greeted them. This time, the room was fuller than before. Community members, activists, and media representatives filled the benches. Some faces were familiar. Mr. Lewis sat near the back, giving Alex a nod of encouragement. Ricky was there too, seated near the middle, arms crossed, his face a mix of pride and concern. At the front of the courtroom, the 3 officers who had arrested Alex sat at their table. They looked more composed than they had the first time, dressed in formal suits instead of uniforms. But Alex noticed the tension in their postures, the slight twitch in their hands, the stiffness in their necks. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose before sitting again. "Today's hearing will address the conduct of the officers involved in the arrest of Mr. Alex Turner," the judge began. "We will review the evidence, witness testimonies, and determine if disciplinary action or further legal proceedings are warranted." Alex felt the gravity of those words. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what came next, for others who might be in his shoes someday. The prosecutor called the first officer to the stand, Officer Grant, the one who had grabbed Alex at the gym. He walked stiffly to the witness chair and took the oath before sitting. Maya leaned toward Alex and whispered, "Watch his body language. People show more than they say when they're uncomfortable." Alex nodded, his eyes locked on Grant. The prosecutor approached, his tone measured but firm. "Officer Grant, can you describe the events that led to Mr. Turner's arrest?" Grant cleared his throat and folded his hands tightly. "We received a call about suspicious activity at the gym. When we arrived, Mr. Turner was there, and he appeared agitated." Alex felt his fists clench at the word agitated. He remembered being calm, confused. Yes, but calm. The prosecutor continued. "At what point did Mr. Turner become a threat?" Grant shifted in his seat. "He refused to cooperate. He pulled away when I tried to detain him." Maya's hand rested lightly on Alex's arm, a silent reminder to stay composed. The prosecutor stepped back. No further questions. Maya stood and approached the stand, her expression thoughtful but pointed. "Officer Grant," she began, "you said you received a call about suspicious activity. Do you have a record of that call?" Grant hesitated. "No, ma'am. It was verbal." Maya raised an eyebrow. "So no official documentation. And when you approached Mr. Turner, you say he was agitated. Did he raise his voice at you? Did he act aggressively?" Grant's jaw tightened. "No, but he was uncooperative." "Uncooperative how?" Maya's voice was calm but firm. "Did he make threats? Did he try to attack you?" "No." The word hung in the air like a weight. Maya took a step closer. "So, to be clear, Mr. Turner didn't pose any physical threat, didn't use threatening language, and wasn't behaving erratically. Yet, you escalated the situation by grabbing him. Is that correct?" Grant's face reddened. "I was following protocol." "Protocol," Maya repeated. "Is it protocol to detain someone without confirming if they've committed any wrongdoing?" Grant opened his mouth but closed it again, clearly flustered. Maya let the silence stretch before speaking again. No further questions. The other two officers were called to the stand next, and their testimonies followed a similar pattern: vague descriptions, weak justifications, and thin excuses. When the last officer stepped down, Alex felt a shift in the room. The narrative was cracking, piece by piece. Finally, it was Alex's turn. He stood, his shoulders square, and walked to the witness chair. After taking the oath, he sat and took a deep breath. Maya approached him, her voice steady. "Alex, can you describe what happened that night in your own words?" Alex's gaze swept over the room before he began. "I was at the gym, stretching before my workout. I noticed the officers come in, but I didn't think anything of it at first. Then, one of them walked straight toward me and asked what I was doing there. When I told him I was working out, he said I wasn't supposed to be there. I was confused, but I stayed calm. I tried to explain that I was a member and had every right to be there. That's when he grabbed me." Maya nodded. "And did you resist?" Alex met her gaze. "No. I pulled my arm away because I was startled. But I didn't swing, I didn't shout, and I didn't threaten anyone." Maya's voice softened. "What were you thinking in that moment?" Alex's throat tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I was thinking, here we go again. I grew up seeing people in my neighborhood get treated like this. I never thought it would happen to me. Until it did." The room was silent. Alex looked directly at the judge. "I wasn't a threat that night. I was a person just like anyone else who wanted to go to the gym, clear my head, and be left alone. But instead, I was treated like a criminal because of assumptions." Maya stepped back. No further questions. The judge studied Alex for a long moment before addressing the room. "We will reconvene after a brief recess to deliberate." The gavel struck, and people began to murmur as they stood. Maya placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. "You were incredible," she said. Alex nodded, exhaustion creeping into his bones. "Thanks." Ricky caught Alex's eye from across the room and gave him a thumbs up. Mr. Lewis nodded solemnly. The support was there, and Alex felt it in his chest like a steady heartbeat. Whatever the decision, Alex knew this: the truth had been spoken, and it was powerful enough to stand on its own. The courtroom was buzzing with tension when the judge returned after the recess. Alex could feel the weight of every eye on him, but he kept his focus steady. He sat upright at the defense table, hands clasped tightly in front of him, heart thudding in his chest like a distant drum. Maya sat beside him, calm and composed, her presence a quiet reassurance. "All rise," the clerk announced as the judge took her seat. Alex stood along with the rest of the room, his breath shallow as the judge adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "This hearing has brought to light several troubling issues," the judge began, her voice carrying over the murmurs that quickly faded to silence. "The testimonies and evidence presented have shown inconsistencies in the officers' accounts and a lack of justifiable cause for the actions taken that night." Alex's pulse quickened. The judge continued, her tone steady but firm. "It is the responsibility of this court to ensure that justice is served not just for one individual, but for the community as a whole. As such, I find that the officers involved in Mr. Turner's arrest acted improperly, failing to follow due process and escalating the situation without cause." A ripple of quiet gasps and murmurs spread across the room. The officers at the front shifted in their seats, their expressions ranging from resignation to disbelief. The judge's gaze hardened. "Officer Grant and his team will face formal disciplinary action and suspension pending further investigation. This court also calls for a full review of current practices within the department to prevent incidents like this from happening again." Alex let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Beside him, Maya's hand briefly squeezed his shoulder in silent support. The judge softened her tone as she addressed Alex directly. "Mr. Turner, you showed remarkable composure in the face of unfair treatment. Your willingness to stand up for what is right, not just for yourself, but for others, is commendable. This case will not erase the harm caused, but I hope it will mark a step toward accountability and justice." The gavel struck. The hearing was over. For a moment, Alex stayed seated as the room erupted into murmurs and movement. Reporters scribbled notes, and spectators whispered to one another. He could see Ricky clapping quietly near the back, and Mr. Lewis was nodding with pride. Maya leaned in, her voice warm. "You did it, Alex." Alex exhaled slowly, his heart still catching up to the moment. "We did it." As Alex gathered his things, one of the officers, Grant, stood and made his way toward Alex. Maya stiffened, her eyes narrowing. Alex held up a hand, signaling her to let him handle it. Grant stopped a few feet away, his expression awkward and uncomfortable. "Turner," he said quietly, shifting on his feet. "Look, He hesitated before continuing. "I messed up. I see that now. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry." The courtroom noise seemed to fade as Alex absorbed the words. They weren't what he expected. For a long moment, he didn't speak. "You're right," Alex said finally, his voice steady but calm. "I can't forget what happened, but maybe this is a step in the right direction." Grant nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Take care of yourself, Turner." "You too," Alex replied. As Grant walked away, Maya stepped up beside Alex. "That was unexpected." "Yeah," Alex murmured, watching the officer disappear through the side door. "But maybe that's what change looks like, one small step at a time." Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Supporters held signs that read, "Justice for Alex Turner and accountability now." When Alex and Maya stepped onto the courthouse steps, a wave of applause rose up from the crowd. Reporters rushed forward with microphones. "Alex, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think this will lead to real change?" Alex raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. He took a deep breath, then began. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice clear and steady. "This is about making sure no one else has to go through what I did. Today is a step forward, but it's not the finish line. Real change happens when we hold each other accountable, when we keep pushing, and when we listen. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Alex stayed grounded. He wasn't here for the noise, he was here for the people listening in silence, for the ones who felt invisible, but now saw that their stories mattered. Maya nudged him, smiling. "You ready to get out of here?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, let's go." Later that night, Alex sat on his couch, the room dim except for the glow of the city lights filtering in through the window. His phone buzzed with new messages, but he ignored them for now. He needed this moment of quiet to take everything in. The weight of the past weeks felt lighter now, though he knew the work wasn't over. The fight for justice was ongoing. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of peace. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When Alex opened it, he found Ricky standing there, holding a takeout bag. "Pancakes," Ricky said with a grin. "Figured you could use a victory dinner." Alex laughed and stepped aside, letting Ricky in. "You know me too well." They sat at the kitchen table, eating and talking late into the night. The conversation drifted from memories at the gym to plans for the future. As Alex listened to Ricky's laughter and the quiet hum of the city outside, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while: hope. He'd stood his ground, spoken his truth, and fought for something bigger than himself. The storm hadn't broken him, it had shaped him into someone stronger. And as he looked ahead, Alex knew one thing for sure: this was only the beginning. The morning sun filtered through Alex's apartment window, casting golden streaks across the floor. The city below was already alive with the hum of a new day. But for once, Alex wasn't rushing. He sat at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming his hands, reflecting on everything that had brought him to this moment. The victory in court wasn't just a win for him. It was a statement that fairness still mattered, that dignity couldn't be taken without a fight. But Alex knew the journey wasn't over. The people who had reached out to him, sharing their own stories of injustice, pain, and resilience, were proof of that. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya. "Big day ahead. You're going to crush it. Proud of you." Alex smiled and replied, "Thanks, Maya. I'll see you there." That afternoon, Alex stood backstage at the city's largest community center, looking out at the packed auditorium. Rows of chairs stretched to the back wall, filled with faces from every corner of the city: students, veterans, activists, neighbors, and even city officials. The air buzzed with anticipation. Mr. Lewis stepped up beside Alex, dressed sharply in a navy blazer. "Full house," he said, his eyes twinkling. "They're here for you." Alex chuckled nervously. "No pressure, right?" Mr. Lewis patted his shoulder. "You're ready. Just speak from the heart." Alex nodded, exhaling slowly. The stage manager gave him the signal, and he stepped out into the warm glow of the stage lights. The applause swelled as he approached the microphone. He took a moment to soak it in, grounding himself in the moment before raising his hand to quiet the crowd. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for being here today." The room fell silent, every face turned toward him. "A few months ago, I was sitting in a holding cell, wondering how things had spiraled so quickly. I was humiliated, scared, and angry, but I wasn't broken, and I wasn't alone. Because of people like you, people who believed in justice and fairness, I found my voice." Alex paused, scanning the room. "This isn't just my story. It's the story of so many others who never got their day in court, who never had a chance to speak their truth. And that's why I'm here to remind you that your voice matters." The audience murmured in agreement. Some nodded, while others wiped at their eyes. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Alex continued. "It's slow, messy, frustrating. But it's possible. We can build something better, something where respect and accountability go hand in hand. And it starts with us by listening, learning, and refusing to let fear or hate win." The applause was thunderous. Alex stepped back slightly, overwhelmed by the energy in the room. As the noise died down, Alex's tone softened. I want to share one last thing, something my grandfather always told me. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about standing tall, even when your knees shake. He smiled, remembering the old man's steady voice. There were a lot of moments when my knees shook, but you showed me that I wasn't standing alone. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Maya stood near the front, clapping proudly, and Ricky let out a whistle that made Alex laugh. Mr. Lewis gave him a slow nod of approval. Alex stepped away from the microphone as the event organizer took the stage to wrap things up. He made his way down the side steps, shaking hands and accepting hugs from people in the crowd as he went. Later, Alex found himself outside, standing beneath the bright blue sky. The air was crisp and cool, filled with the scent of autumn leaves. Maya joined him, her heels clicking softly on the pavement. You were incredible up there, she said. Thanks, Alex said, running a hand through his hair. I just wanted it to feel real. It did, Maya said sincerely. You gave people hope. Just then, Ricky jogged up, holding a to-go cup of coffee in each hand. I thought you could use this, he said, handing one to Alex. Alex laughed and took the cup. You know, if this whole gym thing doesn't work out, you could be a barista. Ricky rolled his eyes. One victory speech, and suddenly, you're a comedian. The three of them stood together, watching as people left the building, their conversations filled with excitement and new ideas. Mr. Lewis walked over, hands in his pockets. So, he said, looking at Alex, what's next for you? Alex took a long sip of his coffee before answering. I think I'm just getting started. Mr. Lewis smiled. Good. The city needs more people like you. Alex's phone buzzed again, but this time he didn't feel the same tension when he picked it up. The message was from someone new. Thank you for sharing your story. Because of you, I'm finally speaking up too. Alex's chest tightened with emotion. He'd hoped his story would make a difference, but seeing it happen in real time felt surreal. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Alex started walking toward the street, Maya and Ricky falling into step beside him. The weight he'd carried for so long felt lighter now. He knew there would still be challenges ahead. There would be moments of doubt, setbacks, and hard conversations. But he also knew he had the strength and the community to face it all. His story had begun with a storm, but it was ending with something far greater: resilience, kindness, and hope. As they walked, the streetlights flickered on, illuminating their path. Alex glanced up at the sky and smiled. The storm had passed, and in its place was a sky full of possibility. Thank you for joining me on this journey of resilience, courage, and hope. Alex's story is a reminder that even in the face of adversity, we all have the power to stand tall, speak our truth, and create change one step at a time. If this story inspired you, please consider subscribing to Life Mosaic for more powerful and uplifting stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit. Your support means everything to us, and with you by our side, we can continue sharing stories that matter. Stay strong, stay kind, and remember you're never standing alone. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.